The snow basin looked harmless from the lip of the ridge, wide, bright, and empty, like a frozen lake someone forgot to fill. Midday sun poured down so hard it turned every drift into a mirror. The light didn't warm anything. It just made the cold feel sharper, like the mountains were daring you to blink. The patrol moved in a loose file at the basin's edge, boots biting into crust, gear clinking softly despite everyone's best effort. Wind slid across the surface in low sheets, dragging glittering powder along the ground. It was the kind of day that made people careless, because you could see so far you started to believe nothing could hide. Then the first round snapped past. It wasn't the sloppy roar of a wild shooter. It was a clean, flat crack from up high, followed by a neat puff of snow exploding at knee height, right where the lead man had been stepping. "Down!" someone shouted, but the voice sounded far away, as if the air itself was swallowing sound. The entire patrol folded into the snow like a line of puppets cut from their strings. Knees hit hard. Gloves slapped the ice crust. Packs thumped. Their shadows sprawled long and sharp beneath them. A second crack. A third. Impacts walked along the shallow ridge line they'd been following, perfectly spaced, perfectly controlled, hurting them. "Contact high," the squad leader barked, trying to force order into a situation that was already shaped like a cage. "Find cover. Find cover." There was no cover. The basin was a bowl, shallow but vast. Two ridges framed it like raised hands. From either side, anyone with height had lines into the center, and anyone in the center had nothing but open white. They crawled anyway, because doing something felt better than waiting to be sorted out by precision fire. The machine gunner tried to set a base, digging the bipod into the snow crust. The medic slid toward the wounded the way medics always do. Low, fast, ignoring how exposed it made him. The radios erupted in bursts of static. "Actual, this is," the squad leader tried, pushing the MIC closer to his mouth as if proximity could bully the signal into working. "We are taking fire. Grid." The response was a shriek of interference. A harsh, mechanical tearing sound that seemed to grind inside the skull. He switched channels. Same shriek. He yanked the antenna, checked the battery, slapped the side of the handset as if it were a stubborn light switch. Nothing but angry noise. "Jammed," the radio specialist said, voice tight, eyes already scanning the ridges. "Hard jam. Someone sitting on us." The squad leader's head lifted a fraction, instinct fighting training. "Can you?" "No, it's not weak. It's close." The first casualty happened in the space between one breath and the next. A rifleman tried to shift toward a shallow depression, something darker under the snow, maybe rock, and a single shot hammered him mid-move. He didn't scream. He just collapsed sideways, one leg folding wrong, the other kicking reflexively as blood began to soak into the snow beneath his hip. "Leg," he gasped, the sound like teeth clacking. "My leg." The medic moved. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for suppression that wasn't coming. He crawled on elbows and knees, shoulders hunched, pack bouncing. Every time he moved, rounds snapped closer, stitching the snow in front of him like someone was drawing a line he wasn't allowed to cross. The shooter wasn't trying to hit the medic. Not yet. The shooter was pinning him. That detail hit with the cold weight of understanding. The enemy wasn't firing in panic. They were firing with purpose. They were shaping the battlefield, controlling where bodies could go, when they could move, how fast they could bleed. "Sniper team," the squad leader called, turning his head toward the Overwatch element that should have been watching the ridge. "Where are you?" The sniper pair had been split by terrain during the approach. One had climbed to a small outcrop for better sight lines, while the other had stayed lower along a drift line, closer to the patrol. Now the split felt like a crack in a dam. A distant muzzle flash blinked from high ground, then disappeared behind rock. Their own Overwatch rifle answered once, twice, but the return shots were swallowed by distance and light. The high-ridge shooter was disciplined. He wasn't giving them a duel. He was giving them a lesson. Above the basin, a small drone, friendly eyes in the sky, hummed into view, turning into position with the steady confidence of something that didn't feel fair. It lasted less than 5 seconds. A sharp pop, almost delicate, and the drone jerked. It didn't explode. It didn't flare dramatically. It simply failed. One wing dipped and it began to spiral, wobbling like a wounded bird. Then it fell behind the far ridge and vanished. For a heartbeat, everyone froze, shocked by the absurdity of it. Then a second drone came, responding to the sudden loss. It died the same way. No fireball, no cinematic fireworks. Just dead air and gravity doing its job. Someone's shooting them, the radio specialist said, voice suddenly too loud in the snow-bright silence. They are hitting them from the ground. The squad leader's eyes flicked upward, then toward the ridges again. From where? A third aircraft, a loitering platform meant to circle and watch, appeared as a dark dot against the pale sky, banking to compensate for wind. The patrol watched it like drowning people watch a rope. It drifted toward the basin. It never stabilized. It dipped behind the ridge and didn't come back. That's three, the machine gunner muttered, half disbelief, half anger. He tried to send a burst up toward the ridge line anyway. The weapon stuttered, then settled. He didn't want to waste belt, but he couldn't not do something. The enemy fire tightened. Rounds snapped closer, chewing into snow within arm's reach. Impact scattered ice chips that stung exposed cheeks. The basin geometry became a prison you could feel in your bones. Two ridges, a crossfire, a shallow depression that kept them alive but also kept them in place. The squad leader fought the radio again, hard jaw clenched. Extraction, this is. Static answered, and then was silence. The kind that made the world feel hollow. A new sound cut through the chaos. Not a burst, not the fast hammer of panic. One single shot, then a pause, then another single shot, same tempo, same spacing, like someone metronoming the violence. The cadence was wrong for the firefight below. Too calm, too measured, too distant. The patrol didn't see the shooter. But above the ridge line, another aircraft fell. Then another, fast enough to feel impossible. The enemy had arrived with an 8-mile plan, drones, spotters, jamming, and now their eyes were being plucked out of the sky one by something they hadn't accounted for. What is that? A rifleman whispered, staring upward, eyes squinting against the glare. Who's shooting? Focus, the squad leader snapped. But his voice carried an edge of the same question. A fifth aircraft spiraled down behind the far ridge, and for a moment the world felt like it had cracked open, because the enemy could still put rounds on them with cruel precision, and yet something unseen was stripping away a major advantage like peeling skin. The medic reached the wounded rifleman and slapped a hand down hard. Pressure on the wound, jaw set. The machine gunner shifted, trying to cover a new angle. The squad leader tried the radio again, as if stubbornness could break a jammer. Nothing. Only incoming fire. Closer now. Walking toward them like footsteps. And above it all, those calm, spaced shots. A presence you couldn't see, only feel through results. A shadow doing work. The squad leader stayed at the sky, then at the ridges, then down at his pinned team. His eyes narrowed. Who's doing that? He said, not as a shout, but as a breath forced through clenched teeth. Ow! At this distance, while we're pinned. The snow kept its secrets. The only woman on the team, quiet operator, loud doubt. Earlier that day, the mountains had looked almost welcoming in the thin sunlight. The air was clear enough to make distant ridgelines appear close, like you could reach out and scratch your name into them. The wind was steady but not cruel. The snow was deep in some places and scoured in others, but it had the kind of surface that held tracks, told stories, if you knew how to read it. The patrol had been inserted at first light, dropped off far enough from the objective to avoid the obvious approaches. The mission was straightforward on paper, and straightforward missions were the most dangerous because people stopped listening to the part of their brain that whispered what IFS. A remote sensor site sat on a high saddle between two peaks, built to watch a narrow corridor that insurgent teams had begun using. A comms relay, too. Small, quiet infrastructure that made bigger systems work. Intelligence said the site had gone odd. Signal interruptions, data gaps, a hint that someone had gotten close enough to tamper with it. The order was simple: verify, pull the data module, and get out before weather shifted. The mountains didn't care about schedules, but the extraction window did. A pickup had been arranged for a narrow time slice when winds were predicted to be manageable. Miss it, and the team would have to walk out over terrain that turned a short hike into a slow bleed. The squad leader, a hard-eyed staff sergeant who ran his team like a clock, gathered them in a tight semicircle during the final gear check. "Objectives there," he said, pointing with a gloved hand at a line of rock and snow that looked like any other line of rock and snow. "We go in, we verify, we grab the module. We don't linger. We don't improvise unless we have to. We're out before the sky changes its mind." The team was built for quick movement and hard fights. 2 riflemen up front, a machine gunner for weight, a medic who never stopped scanning hands and faces for the first sign of trouble, a radio out-tech specialist who carried not just comms gear, but the responsibility of connecting them to the outside world. And then the sniper element. 2 shooters, one with a reputation that made people nod when he spoke, and the other, quieter. She didn't fit people's expectations of what a sniper looked like in their heads. She was smaller than her partner, bundled in cold gear that made everyone look bulky anyway, but there was a stillness to her that didn't come from freezing. It came from focus. She spoke when necessary. She listened always. Her partner cracked a joke while checking his rifle, something about snow being a good place to hide mistakes. A couple of the others laughed. The squad leader's gaze flicked toward her and lingered just long enough to carry unspoken doubt. "Stay tight," he said. "Keep up." Her partner added, quieter, "Don't overthink. This is a straight line." She didn't argue. Arguing in a group like this didn't change minds. It just gave people more reasons to dismiss you. She checked her kit with the same calm she always used. Optic cover secure. Spare battery tucked where it could be reached with numb fingers. Range notes folded inside a waterproof sleeve. She watched wind movement across the snow surface and measured it against what the ridges would do to it. Wind in mountains didn't behave like wind in a flat field. It curled. It dropped. It lied. As they moved, she marked a fallback route with her eyes, an ugly, slower line that followed a low ravine and a series of wind-carved shelves. It was longer. It was harder. It was less exposed. The others glanced at it and dismissed it because it looked like work. Near a sparse tree line that shouldn't have had fresh cuts at this altitude, she stopped. Not fully, just enough that her pause became a question. The squad leader turned. "What?" She pointed subtly, not with a whole-arm gesture that would make her look dramatic, but with a small nod. A branch had been cut recently, clean, not snapped by wind. The pale wood was still raw under the bark, the edge too sharp for nature. Below it, boot patterns in the snow, not the scattered impressions of hikers or hunters wandering. These were purposeful. They stepped, paused, stepped again, spaced, measured. Someone had moved with discipline, not curiosity. The squad leader's eyes flicked down, then away. "Could be old," one rifleman said. "It's not old," she replied, voice quiet but firm. "The cut is fresh." Her partner leaned in, glanced, shrugged. "Could be locals." "In this weather?" she asked, but she already knew the answer wasn't going to matter. They moved on. Later, the radio out-tech specialist muttered something while adjusting the handset. "Link's hiccuping," he said. "Not dead, but weird." The squad leader frowned. "That's early." "Yeah," the specialist said. "Like something is warming up." She heard that and filed it away like a cartridge clicked into a magazine. As the team climbed, she noticed the sky traffic, friendly drones and platforms taking predictable paths along a corridor dictated by terrain and line of sight. It wasn't anyone's fault. Mountains made flight patterns. But predictability was a weapon if your enemy was patient enough to exploit it. She didn't say it out loud at first. People like things simple. People like the story that said, "We go in, we get it, we'll leave. This won't be complicated." She kept scanning. On a far ridge line, high and narrow, she saw a faint metallic glint. Not the dull reflection of rock. Not the sparkling scatter of ice. One single flash, too clean and too brief to be natural. Her partner didn't see it. He was talking, smiling, comfortable. She tucked the image away. Inside her chest rig, beneath layers and straps, she carried something small, a worn marker patch and a folded note sealed in plastic. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Its presence was enough, like a reminder pressed against her ribs. When the team paused to adjust spacing, her partner gestured toward an obvious Overwatch rock, a high point that screamed sniper position to anyone who'd ever drawn a battlefield on a whiteboard. "That's us," he said. She looked at it, then looked away. "No," she said. "Wrong." He blinked. "It's perfect." "It's obvious," she replied. He scoffed softly. "You want to crawl into that mess over there." He pointed to a wind-carved lip that looked like it would swallow a person, a route that promised discomfort and slow movement. "It sees behind the ridge," she said. "The obvious point doesn't. The obvious point sees the whole basin." "Exactly," she said, and let the implications sit there. The squad leader was already moving again. Time was pulling on them like a leash. "We're not taking the scenic route," the squad leader said when the discussion reached him. "We're going standard. We don't have time." She didn't fight it. She nodded and moved. But she kept counting distances, kept mapping dead zones where a person would be pinned if shots came from the ridges, kept noting how the bowl-shaped basin ahead offered a perfect crossfire. No one wanted to hear it. They wanted speed. They wanted confidence. As they approached the basin, she slowed for half a second, eyes locked on the far ridgeline again. The glint was gone, but something there still didn't belong. Contact. The trap closes in daylight. The ambush didn't start with chaos. It started with intelligence. A single shot cracked and struck the radio tech specialist pack antenna, snapping it like a dry twig. The specialist jerked, surprised more than hurt, and the handset immediately screamed with a violent burst of interference. The enemy's first move wasn't to kill. It was to isolate. Before the squad leader could shout, another shot walked into the snow line in front of the patrol, then another, and another, forcing them down, forcing them into the basin's shallow depression like cattle pushed toward a pen. "Down! Down!" the squad leader roared. They hit the snow hard. The machine gunner tried to set up, but the moment he raised his head, rounds snapped closer, chewing snow into his face. He lowered again, swearing, and shifted to find a micro-angle that didn't immediately draw fire. The basin revealed itself as a trap the longer you looked at it. Two ridges, two dominant lines. A crossfire so clean it might have been designed on purpose. The shallow depression they'd crawled into felt like cover, until they realized it was also a pocket. From inside it, their movement options collapsed. Stand up and die. Crawl out and get cut down crossing open snow. Stay put and bleed. Comms went fully dead. The squad leader tried backup frequencies. Then the satellite handshake. Then anything that might reach beyond the bowl. Nothing. Jamming wasn't just present. It was aggressive. It was close. It was intentional. The squad leader tried to reposition uphill, a push toward the left ridge where the slope looked slightly less exposed. The moment a rifleman lifted a knee to move, a round cracked and struck near his shoulder. He yelped and dropped, hand immediately clutching his arm. Blood seeped through fabric, bright against white. "Two wounded," the medic said, voice tight. "Two." Wind shifted, and with it the visibility. Loose powder lifted and slid across the basin in sudden curtains, thin white veils that appeared and vanished, making distance judgment slippery. It was bright enough to see far, but the moving snow made everything unstable, as if the mountains were breathing. The machine gunner fired short bursts, trying to keep heads down. The belt was already lighter than he wanted. Cold and movement had a way of making ammo disappear faster than it should. Heat became a problem even in the cold. Sustained fire warmed metal, and warmed metal attracted attention. It also changed the weapon's mood, made it less reliable, more stubborn. A friendly drone rose again, someone somewhere desperate for eyes in the sky. It died instantly. The patrol watched it spiral down and felt a particular kind of fear. The fear of being blind, pinned, and alone. The squad leader's face hardened. "They planned this," he said, not as a guess but as a grim acknowledgement. And then the worst detail surfaced. The enemy wasn't trying to wipe them quickly. Not with this level of control. They weren't throwing bodies at the ball. They weren't rushing. They were shaping. They were keeping the patrol alive, just barely, and trapped. Why? The medic whispered, pressing hard on the leg wound, eyes flicking toward the ridges. Why not finish us? She lay low, eyes scanning. Her heart beat fast, but her mind stayed clear. Fear existed. It simply didn't get a vote. She followed the ridgeline where she'd seen the glint earlier. And there, just for a fraction of a second between snow curtains, she caught it again. A shimmer. A mast. Something tall and unnatural against rock. A jammer. Not a guess. A fact. And beyond that ridge, movement. Disciplined, not panicked. A separate hostile team was moving toward the direction of the census site. They weren't rushing into the firefight to finish the patrol. They were using the firefight as cover. The patrol wasn't the prize. The patrol was the distraction. Her sniper partner shifted beside her, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. "I can take that marksman," he murmured, watching for muzzle flash from the high shooter who kept their heads low. She watched the marksman too, and recognized the pattern. Bait. The marksman was controlling them. Yes, but the force multipliers were elsewhere. The jammer. The spotters. The teams moving on the sensor route. The air denial. If she stayed here and dueled, she would be playing the enemy's game. She leaned toward the squad leader, voice low so it didn't carry. "I can get behind that ridge," she said. The squad leader stared at her like she'd offered to walk into a blizzard without a coat. "No, you stay with. Staying gets us pinned until they are done," she said. "They are not here for us." His eyes flicked toward the ridges, then to the wounded, then back to her. He wanted protocol. He wanted the plan. But the plan was gone the moment the jammer lit up. "Angle?" he asked, grudging. She pointed with a subtle motion toward the wind-carved lip she'd argued for earlier. The wrong route. The longer crawl. The uncomfortable line. His jaw tightened. "You go. You alone," he said. She nodded. "Yes." He hesitated. Then, quieter, "If you can't." "I can," she said. Not as arrogance. As a promise. She stripped down to essentials right there in the snow, sliding extra weight out of her pack and into a shallow hole. Minimal magazines. Small toolkit. Her range notes. Rifle. The squad leader grabbed her shoulder briefly, half restraint, half acknowledgement. Then she disappeared, crawling low into the glare. The solo move, the impossible route to the long shot. The world narrowed when she went alone. The firefight became a distant rumble behind her, sharp cracks and muffled booms softened by snow and terrain. Up close, all she heard was her own breathing inside fabric, the faint scrape of gear, the wind whispering over hard-packed drifts. She moved the way you moved when being seen meant dying. Slow when necessary, fast when possible, always low. The wind-carved lip offered concealment, but it demanded patience. It was a narrow shelf shaped by months of storms. One wrong shift and she'd slide into open snow like a bead on glass. She waited for gusts, those moments when powder lifted and the world blurred. When the gust hit, she moved. When it died, she froze. It was a rhythm. Wind, crawl, stop, listen. Wind, crawl, stop, listen. Her optic began to fog at the edges, a thin halo of ice creeping inward. Cold made equipment stubborn, and her breath, no matter how controlled, carried moisture. She tucked her face lower, angled exhale away, and wiped quickly when she could, mindful that any sudden gleam could flash like a signal flare. A narrow ravine opened ahead, a cut between rock walls that offered both cover and danger. Sound carried in places like that. A scrape could echo. A cough could become a beacon. She slid into it anyway, because the ravine hid her from the ridges. Her knees ground against rock beneath thin snow. Pain flared, then faded into background. Pain was information. She noted it and kept moving. She reached a point where the ravine angled up and narrowed, and she paused, heart hammering harder now, not from fear, but from the steep pull of altitude. From here, she could see behind the ridge that owned the kill zone. The wrong angle had been right. On the far side, tucked into a pocket of rock, sat the jammer setup, a mast with a compact array, cables running into a small pack of gear, two fighters tending it with careful attention. Nearby, a spotter team watched the basin through optics, relaying adjustments with hand signals and short bursts of radios that worked because they weren't being jammed. And there, moving along a line that traced the sensor route, was the real operation. A team of disciplined fighters escorting a sealed hardware case, hard-sided, strapped tight, carried like something fragile and valuable. Their movement was deliberate. They weren't running. They weren't panicking. They were confident. The firefight was their curtain. Her patrol was the noise that kept eyes and response teams elsewhere. Above them, enemy-controlled drones and light aircraft circled in predictable loops, racetracks dictated by wind and terrain. They weren't just watching. They were part of the trap, maintaining a temporary bubble of control. They could spot movement, direct fire, and, if needed, drop small munitions to seal exits. The enemy had built a system. She understood systems. She pulled out her range notes, pencil mark already smeared by cold. She didn't have the luxury of endless calculation. She had anchor points, a distinctive rock outcrop, a saddle line, the known dimensions of the ridge spacing. She estimated distance by terrain reference and the way objects sat in the air. Wind readouts came from the snow itself, streamers lifting off ridgelines, the way powder drifted in low ribbons, the slight change in brightness when gusts thickened the air. She timed aircraft passes by rhythm. A drone banked at the same point each loop. Another platform dipped slightly at the far end, correcting for a crosswind. Predictability wasn't a flaw in the aircraft. It was a flaw in the enemy's confidence. She shifted her position by inches until the angle was clean. Then she saw something that tightened her throat. Near the root, moving under guard, was a figure that didn't match the fighters. Smaller, less confident in movement. Hands kept close, posture hunched in the way cold and fear made people hunch. A hostage. A force technician. Someone pulled into this operation because they knew the sensor site. Her finger hovered near the trigger. She could take shots now, but a wrong hit here would be more than a mistake. It would be a moral fracture, one she would carry longer than bruises. She waited. The guard shifted the hostage away from the cluster. The separation opened. She settled into breath control. Inhale, exhale, pause. The cold made every breath feel like inhaling needles, but the pause was where the world stopped shaking. First aircraft shot. Calm. Measured. She didn't aim for a dramatic explosion. She aimed for function, a critical point that would turn a flying eye into a falling problem. The rifle cracked once, sharp, contained. In the distance, the drone jerked. It didn't burst into flame. It simply failed, wing dipping, spiral beginning. It vanished behind rock. She didn't smile. She didn't whisper victory to herself. She moved, because the moment the aircraft fell, someone would start hunting for the source. Snow around her suddenly felt loud. The crunch of her own boots, the scrape of fabric, even the beat of her pulse. She shifted to a secondary hide, using wind-scoured patches that didn't hold deep tracks, sliding behind a rock shoulder that broke her outline. From here, she could see the jammer team again. She could see the aircraft loop corridor, and she could hear the distant firefight, where her team was still trapped in the bowl, bleeding time away. She worked. 9 falling birds. Target ladder. Enemy adapts. Unit survives. She didn't shoot at random. Random was for panic. She built a ladder in her mind. Force multipliers first. The things that made the enemy strong. The nodes that held the system together. First, the jammer and its handlers. Without that, her team could breathe. Second, the aircraft controllers and spotters. Without them, the enemy's eyes blurred. Third, RPG teams positioned to seal exits. Without them, extraction might still be possible. Fourth, the enemy marksman pinning the bowl. Without him, movement would be less suicidal. Fifth, squad leaders directing fires. Without leadership, violence became noise. Sixth, crew served weapon teams. Without them, the enemy lost weight. She started with the air. A second aircraft banked into the wind at the predictable point. One shot. It faltered, dipped, spiraled. A third came into the same lane, confident, unaware the lane had become a kill line. One shot, down. She conserved ammunition with discipline, because every pull mattered. The count climbed, second, third, fourth, each fall reducing enemy overwatch, each fall creating a subtle shift in the basin's rhythm. The enemy's coordinated fire hesitated in micro-moments, as if their system was stuttering. She shifted to the ground force multipliers. A spotter leaned into his optics, calm as if watching a training lane. A small device, laser or range tool, glinted near his hand. He was feeding the marksman data, tightening the trap. She waited until his posture aligned. One shot. He collapsed, not dramatically, just suddenly absent. Another fighter reached for the device. She shot the device's mount, splitting the support and sending it tumbling into snow. Then the jammer support mast. She could have tried to hit the operator's head, but wind and distance made that a coin flip. Better to break the system. The mast wasn't armored. It was fragile in the way most sophisticated things were fragile. One shot. Metal snapped, the mast sagging. The jammer's output faltered. In the basin, she couldn't hear it, but she imagined the moment. Radios crackling, a thin thread of signal returning like a gasp after being underwater. Then she saw the enemy's cohesion node. Near the hardware case, a figure stood slightly apart, posture authoritative, gestures sharp, head moving like someone tracking the whole fight at once. Not the loudest, but the center. This was the turning point shot. The shot that didn't just kill a person, it broke an idea. She waited for the wind to lull, for the commander to pause mid-gesture. She breathed in, out, and held the pause. One shot. The figure jerked and dropped behind the rock line. The gesture cut off mid-command. Around him, the fighters didn't instantly panic, but they hesitated. One looked down. Another turned to someone else for direction. A small gap opened in the enemy's certainty. In the basin, enemy fire became less synchronized, less walking and more scattered. She saw the effect even at distance. Like a machine losing timing, her own team began to move. Not because they suddenly felt brave, but because a leader now had a sliver of opportunity. The machine gunner in the bowl laid controlled suppressive fire, short burst time to cover the medic's crawl. The medic dragged the wounded into a slightly deeper depression, shifting them away from the worst angles. The squad leader organized a staggered bound, hand signals snapping, bodies moving one at a time. The extraction window was still shrinking, but now it wasn't impossible. Then the enemy adapted. Of course they did. Competent enemies didn't fold. They adjusted. A small team peeled off from the ridge, climbers moving ridge to ridge, using rock lines to approach her suspected position. And above, a drone shifted lower, closer, sweeping for muzzle flash and movement. Her constraints compounded fast. Ammo was down to a few magazines. The rifle's barrel heat crept up, changing its temperament. Her optic iced again at the edges, fogging the world like a narrowing tunnel. And snow, clean snow, held stories. Footprints were confessions. She couldn't leave a straight line. She used a simple rule: fire once, move twice. After each shot, she shifted position, not far, but enough to break triangulation. She timed movement with gusts, when powder lifted and erased details. She crossed wind-scoured patches where footprints didn't sink deep. She kept to shadow lines where glare didn't betray her outline. The drone's buzz grew louder, an insect sound that became terrifying when you understood what it meant. Eyes. She heard muffled crunch above her, boots or crampons biting into rock and snow, slow and careful. The counterhunt was close. She could take the nearest hunter, end him, relieve the pressure. But killing the nearest wasn't always the smart play. Smart was removing direction. She waited, heart punching against her ribs, as a figure higher on the ridge leaned forward, pointing, guiding, team leader posture, subtle control. One shot. The leader dropped, and the hunters hesitated, suddenly unsure which rock line mattered, which angle was safe. The drone dipped lower, searching, tightening the net. She shifted again, body low, moving like a shadow across rock. Another aircraft swung into the corridor, this one tighter, lower, almost aggressive, as if the enemy had decided to sacrifice altitude for a chance to spot her. It was a knife. She waited for the bank, the predictable wind correction that made it vulnerable. One shot. The aircraft jerked, dipped, and spiraled behind the ridge, disappearing into the mountains like a swallowed secret. The aerial net was gone. In the basin, her team's movement became more confident, not reckless, but possible. They bound toward the pickup zone, dragging wounded, using the lull she'd carved. The enemy tried one last shove. An RPG team stepped up along an angle that could cut off the retreat. She saw the tube's dark line against snow, saw the moment the gunner prepared. She took them out in order, gunner first, then the assistant reaching to grab the tube. Seconds mattered more than body counts. The squad crested toward the extraction point, an open patch where rotor-wash or vehicle engines would churn snow into chaos. The squad leader threw an armed signal. Faster. Now. Enemy fire faded into scattered shots. Not gone, but fractured. Cohesion had been broken. The enemy's objective was slipping. And still, none of them had seen her. Not truly. They only felt the shape of her work in the space it created. Debrief in the snowlight. Respect earned. Cost paid. Extraction came at the edge of the window, just as the sky began to change its tone. Subtle at first, a shift in wind direction. A hint that the mountains were about to rearrange the day. Rotor wash, if it was aircraft, or engines, if it was ground, tore at the snow, turning powder into a violent cloud that swallowed everything within a few meters. Visibility collapsed into a white storm that wasn't weather, just machinery. The squad loaded wounded first, hands gripping straps, boots slipping, voices sharp and clipped to fight the noise. The squad leader kept scanning, weapon up, eyes moving like he expected the enemy to appear out of the white at any moment. They didn't. The enemy had lost too much structure. Inside the transport, tight, vibrating, cold leaking through metal, the squad leader finally got full comms back. The radio specialist's hands shook as he reconnected systems, face streaked with ice and sweat. A voice came through, clearer now, filled with urgency and relief. Confirm you have the module. The squad leader blinked. What module? There was a pause on the line, the kind that carried the weight of everything they hadn't known. Enemy team was moving on the sensor site, the voice said. We believe they were extracting the data module, hardware case. That module contains route tracking, response times, surveillance gaps. If they get it out, they can plan ambushes for months. They can stage propaganda. They can predict us. The squad leader's eyes slid toward the radio specialist, then toward the medic, then toward the wounded. Understanding settled into place like a final puzzle piece. They hadn't been the target. They'd been the curtain. The debrief later, inside a warmer space where hands thawed and bruises emerged, made it official. Intelligence confirmed the enemy plan. Steal the sensor's data module, capture response patterns, and use the footage and timing data to set future traps. The ambush in the basin was designed not to destroy the patrol quickly, but to keep them pinned, blind, and isolated while the extraction team slipped away with the hardware case. The air denial assets, drones and light platforms, were part of the system. A temporary no-fly bubble, eyes and guidance, an invisible cage built out of signal and altitude. And then the reports came in, 9 aircraft lost. 1 jammer crippled. Spotters down. Enemy coordination fractured. The squad leader sat through it with a stiff spine and a clenched jaw, the kind of posture that said he was replaying every decision. When it ended, he stood and walked out into the snowlight outside the shelter, needing air that didn't smell like fuel and blood. She was already there, not standing tall like a hero in a poster, just leaning slightly against the cold wall, helmet off, hair flattened by sweat and cold, eyes distant as if still watching ridgelines. For a moment, he simply looked at her, and he didn't know how to fit what she'd done into the box he'd built for her in his mind. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, not now, from after, the delayed tremor that came when function finally stopped holding fear at bay. She flexed her fingers as if trying to remind them they belonged to her. Her knees ached, bruised raw from crawling rock and ice. Her cheeks were chapped, cracked, and stung when she breathed. She looked tired in a way that wasn't sleep-deep. It was deeper than that. It was the fatigue of carrying silence while doing violence with precision. The squad leader stepped closer. He didn't do speeches. He didn't believe in dramatic praise. He just said the truth. You saved them. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the mountains, where the ridges still stood indifferent. I did the work, she said finally. He nodded once. Then, quieter, you tried to tell me. I did, she said. He exhaled, slow, and I didn't listen. She didn't twist the knife. She didn't even look satisfied. She simply reached into her chest rig and pulled out the small worn patch and folded note, just enough that he could see it existed, not enough to read it. A reminder, she said. He didn't ask what it said. He understood the concept without needing details. A past cost, a past lesson, something carried close so it couldn't be ignored. They had a technician, she added, eyes narrowing slightly. A forced one. I waited. I wasn't sure I'd get the shot window again. The squad leader's expression shifted. Respect deepened into something heavier. You held, he said. I had to, she replied. If I'm going to live with it, it has to be right. Footsteps approached. Her sniper partner, face still pale from the firefight, eyes wide with a new kind of humility. He stopped a few steps away, as if unsure he'd earned a right to come close. He swallowed. I didn't see it, he admitted. The angle, the glint, any of it. She looked at him then, and there was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet clarity. I did, she said. He nodded. Once. Yeah. He hesitated, then forced the words out like they were heavier than his rifle. You weren't extra, he said. You were the reason we're here. The squad leader didn't correct him. He didn't soften it. He let it land, because it needed to. For a long moment, the three of them stood outside in the daylight snow, listening to the wind. The mountains didn't offer applause. The cold didn't care who had been underestimated. The ridges remained ridges. But something had changed anyway. Not in the landscape. In the space between people. She tucked the patch and note back into her rig. She flexed her hands again, trying to settle the tremor. Fear was still there. It always would be. But it hadn't stopped her. Belonging wasn't given. It was earned. Quietly, painfully, one deliberate shot at a time. She stepped away from the shelter and into the open snowlight, listening to the silence returning, and the world felt vast again, not because it was safe, but because she had carved a path through it when it mattered. And somewhere far back in the basin, beneath the bright, indifferent sun, the snow held 9 new scars where aircraft had fallen, proof that an unseen shadow had been there, doing the work, when everyone else thought the story belonged to someone louder.